Good morning, Wooten.
Good afternoon, Forrest.
Yeah. How is the weather up north? And fuck, it's no. You got a blizzard a few weeks ago, I think, didn't you?
Nah, it's cleared up.
Okay. All right. So when we left off, we had talked about the how the uh, Sachem of the Wamapog, the English name he went by being Alexander, his actual name being Wamsuta, and he was replaced by his brother, who went by the English name of Philip, but, which is where we get the name King Philip's War. Wamsuta slash Alexander died in 1662. He seems to have died of disease after having a brief meeting with the English. Of course, we've talked about how with Native American culture, how their religion worked. The disease, the priests, the shamans, of their or of their culture could curse diseases upon their enemies, and so the fact that Wamsuta Alexander had a meeting with English and immediately got sick. To them, that was like, oh, the English. It's like Putin assassin. It's like Putin using poison, right? To them, you know. And so he was replaced by Philip, but or whom. This is a word I don't really know how to use because I haven't heard it a lot, and it's in Wamapong, and I could barely speak English, my own language. I don't pretend to be able to pronounce other people's languages. Spelling Pumetacom, Pumtacom. I'm gonna use Philip because I think using that name that I can pronounce is better than mispronouncing a name I don't know how to say. You know?
To be fair,
And
the entire
so,
reason they had those names is so gringos slash gaijin like you from outside
yeah,
their culture could call them something.
yeah,
So
you
you're
know?
using it for its original intention.
Yeah, that is one of the reasons they did that, right? And so Alexander dies in 1662, and he's replaced by Philip. And Philip is, now Philip he doesn't declare war right away. He spends over a decade trying to make alliances and rally the northeastern Native Americans against the English. Because at this point, keep in mind, Thanksgiving was in the 1620s, and now it's the 1660s, 1670s. Now people are starting to see the writing on the wall, right? What was at first simply a matter of, oh, we can use the English, there's not that many, there's a single colony there. And while Plymouth grows pretty quickly, right? You get the Great Migration where it's no longer just Plymouth. And granted, Plymouth explodes, but it's still just a single colony. It grows to the size where it could rival another, powerful sachem, but it's still just a single fact. It's still like, oh, it could have just been, if it had stopped at Plymouth, there wouldn't have been much of a problem. Except the whole Northeast gets invaded by the Great Migration, and by the time of King Philip's War, there's about like double the amount of Europeans as there are northeastern Indians. You know, so they're all red. So now, granted, when there's double the amount, includes women, children. So it's not just like fighting men, but the fact is like they're just outnumbered at this point, and it's just getting worse because
Well, I
people are
mean,
having kids.
and the Native Americans aren't all fighting warriors either. So I mean, them being
Yeah.
outnumbered 2 to 1, you can mostly assume, you know, people that can fight, that's 2 to 1 for them too.
Yeah. But it's even worse. So this goes into why looking at King Philip's War is interesting, because it shows a pattern that happens to pretty much every Indian war in American history up until there are no more Indian wars, right? King Philip's War is just like the big example that sets the pattern, because a lot of the Indians either stay neutral or they side with the English.
Mm-hmm.
A major group of Indians who side with the English are what are called prayer Indians. These are Indians who have converted to be Christians. And, there are multiple reasons why they might have. Some of them might have just been convinced for one reason or another that this, Christianity was like the one true religion. And, if you've survived an apocalyptic event, seen all your people wiped out, and, you might, if you're a religious person, that might be a selling point to you, right?
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these people are Puritans, and I think Quakers are involved. So, I mean, people who are really devout. So, I mean, people who really, really believe their religion, right? So, I mean, people who could probably sell it to you.
The first wave were definitely a lot of Puritans,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of earlier colonization of all this is just
Opportunistic.
England expects, well, not just opportunity, it's England trying to get rid of people they don't want,
Similar to Australia.
Yeah, before Australia, they do this with their English colonies, and granted,
Yeah.
a lot of it's simply where
You send the expendables.
Yeah. And granted, there are a lot of people who are like, okay, I can't make it here, but there's opportunity over there. I'm gonna go and maybe get lucky, right? And so there's never just one factor, right? That's what you have to. That's an important thing to keep in mind, right? Even though we've already brought up multiple reasons, multiple factors, there are things I'm forgetting or just don't know about or just don't have time to mention, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you listed the numbers earlier, which I think are interesting. So, after the big propaganda thing with the agreement, and then the Thanksgiving celebration, using all that for propaganda, so within 50 years, the population being, you have the numbers, pretty much nothing to like hundreds, even thousands of people migrating over here within 50 years.
Yeah. By the time of King Philip's War, there's like 60 to 70,000 Europeans in the Northeast.
Many thousands of people within 50 years.
Yeah. So that's why this is referred to as like the Great. Granted, there are multiple events where you go, it's the Great Migration, but this is a Great Migration.
Jesus,
a lot of people move over here very quickly.
Yeah. So for my frame of reference, that's like, if you're averaging it, like 10,000 people a year, or sorry, no, 50 years, about 50 to 60 to 70,000. So like over 1,000 people a year are moving over here.
And granted, some of that population increase is from natural births.
But then again, all sorts of. You have 10 kids because 3 of them are going to survive and crap like that.
Yeah. But, it's part of the reason they're able to be outnumbered is, the natives are still, they're still dealing with European diseases, not as much, not as bad as it was in, like, the 1610s, but they're still dealing with diseases.
And then, of
And
course,
so,
they they deal with their own infighting as well. I mean,
yeah.
the the colonies aren't the only thing they're worried about. They have other alliances, people they're supposed to help, and enemies that they're getting help with or helping against.
Yeah, they're still the natives are still interfighting, which is the second thing that becomes a reoccurring pattern with with all of the Indian wars, is that they could not create a unified front, right? Not only did prayer Indians mostly side with the English because that's one of the main reasons they became Christians in the first place, is because they were still they weren't Europeans. They were still like treated kind of badly, still looked down upon, but they were trusted more and treated a little better than non-converts, right? There's a little bit more trust, a little bit more fairness. So, but and granted, they're still being screwed over because they're not, white Europeans. But
Yeah,
it's a little better, right?
class system, they're bottom of the totem pole, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Sorry to use.
But they're at least on the totem pole.
I didn't even realize the. Yeah, I used the term.
Yeah.
Totem pole.
Granted, granted, these people don't do totem poles. Totem poles are a Pacific Northwest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even mean to use that term and just realized how fucked up that might sound.
I know. But it is interesting that that phrase has entered our lexicon.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That idiom is so ingrained into me, I just used it and didn't even.
Right? And so it's just one, yeah. It wasn't just the prayer Indians though. So remember how I kept mentioning how like a big reason the Wampanoag made an agreement with the English because they wanted an ally against their arch rivals, the make sure I'm look at this word and try to say it correctly.
And that was a separate alliance that they were against.
A separate their rivals, the Narragansett, right? Who were their northeastern culture. They have their own internal factions, just as the Wampanoag have their own little internal little Asatcham factions, but they're like a cultural group, and the Narragansett are another, culture group with their own little internal factions. But they're also like these groups are enough rivals where Oswantum made an alliance with Plymouth, and that started all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, at this point, it's gotten so bad that the Wampanoag and the Narragansett ally with each other, in the event where when there's to them, it's when the war happens, because at this point they're planning for the war, right? When the war happens, they're allied. They will both fight the English together, which is funny because the whole reason they're in this problem is because one wanted to use the English against the other.
Yeah.
However, at this point, they both know that even allied, they're outnumbered, right? They need help from more Native Americans. And so they go to one of them, I'll say that, this is a word where I know how to say this, because even you know how to say this word. The Mohawks.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the Mohawks are a little further east. They're part of the Iroquois Confederacy, not much part of the story. And you're about to figure out why they're not part of the story, because the Mohawks refuse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the Mohawks, one, to them the English aren't encroaching on their territory yet. Because the Mohawks, as part of the Iroquois Confederacy, are further west, right? That's reason one. Reason two, they are used. Again, this goes back to weapons. The English have something the Mohawks want: weapons, and they're using those weapons to fight the French.
Yeah.
Because because keep in mind, we're still in that time, in the, now in the 21st century, the French and English have been friends since, the 1910s, right?
I don't.
World War One,
Okay, yeah.
right? They've been allies for over 100 years but we have to realize, for 1,000 years, the French and English were rivals, and so the English were selling the Mohawks weapons to use against the French and the French's Indian allies, because at this point, Canada was under French control.
Yeah.
So the Mohawks are the opinion of, we don't need to fight the English. We're fighting north. You go deal with your problem. That's not our problem.
Yeah. The French had control of Canada until shortly after the Civil War.
No.
Not shortly after, but anyway.
No.
Don't mean to get you
Future.
on the side, right?
This might be the next series. The French-Indian War happens a little before the American Revolution. In fact, George Washington fights in the French and Indian War, which is the spark that lights the 7 Years' War, which is World War Zero.
I'm talking about something
yeah,
else.
That's in the early 1700s.
I'm talking about something else entirely, man. Don't worry about me.
Yeah. But at this point, Canada's French. What we would think of today as Canada is under French control, and the French have their own Indian allies, and so the Mohawks are busy fighting them. So, at this point, and there's also another reason, just the general where this alliance against the English just can't get enough people on board. And there's just a general sense of hopelessness. Because a lot of people just don't think that they can win. And that fighting will simply make things worse. Right? And so a lot of them just decide that they just have to make the war, that they can't beat the English. So they just have to try to make the best of a bad situation. Which is one of the reasons you have prayer Indians, and you just have natives who just don't bother fighting.
Yeah, one of those things where, yeah, I can see that. Everyone they're trying to ally with is like, well, unless everybody's on board, we're screwed, and it doesn't look like everybody's on board, and so nobody gets on board.
Yeah, it's a
22.
negative feedback loop,
Yeah, that.
And so, but Philip and other chieftains try to rally forces for over a decade, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, war kind
took their time.
Yeah, they sell lands, try to gather weapons, make alliances, all to try, right? So, because for some of them, they would just rather go down fighting than just be absorbed,
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, the war, there's a spark, right? And every great tragedy, it starts with something. There's a spark where it starts a war where it's not actually about the spark. It just lit the box on fire. And in this case, it was the murder of a prayer Indian named John Sassamon. Yes, his name was John because he was a Harvard-educated Christian Indian interpreter and preacher.
Harvard was already there?
Apparently, yeah. Yeah, Harvard's old. That's why it's
realize
so
how long.
that's why it's so prestigious, and that's why you have to be rich just to get in. It's, yeah,
No
yeah.
idea how quickly in the colonies Harvard was established. Wow.
Well, think about this. You have even the colonies have rich parents, and those rich parents want their kids to get an education. Now you could try to sail them over the seas to England and send them to Oxford, or you could just build your own fucking school.
Hmm.
So they built their own school,
Yeah, I get
and
it.
that was Harvard.
I just didn't
Yeah.
realize that. It's interesting.
Oh yeah. And so John, this is he's a preacher, and he has a falling out with Philip, and he has a falling out with Philip in 1674, in the winter of 1674. In the spring of 1675, he is found dead. And so, wow. This is where the issue starts, because what happens is Plymouth arrests 3 Wampum Indians and executes 3 of them for the murder of this Indian, which that's a violation in the original Thanksgiving Treaty. Because one of the things of the original Thanksgiving Treaty was like, okay, we'll deal with our people, you deal with your people, right?
Yeah, extradition.
Yeah. And it's the fact that
extradition.
yeah,
you
like
try
this
your-
wasn't even extradition though, because
Yeah.
they can't, like, even if these people did kill this guy, which is debatable, because the witnesses came out months later like, oh yeah, we totally saw these 3 people kill this guy, right? And so it's questionable whether or not they actually did it. What the important thing is, the Indian, who was apparently killed by Indians, being arrested by the English, and then tried and murdered by the tried by the English, and then executed by the English.
Mm-hmm.
That's an insult to, the sovereignty of the Indians.
Yeah. I mean, there was writing on the wall, and then there was this incident that basically said, yeah, you guys don't care about our agreement.
Yeah, it's the
Now you're
straw.
just doing what you want
This is
because you think we won't do anything about it.
Yeah, it was the straw that broke the camel's back, right?
Yeah.
And so at this point, like, there are attempts to, de-escalate things, but at this point, the English, there have been decades of the English, failing to live up to, the spirit and principle of the original Thanksgiving Treaty, and just doing whatever the fuck they wanted. And you have, again, 50 years of this. So the Indians just said enough. They, war broke out, right? This is not some kind of war podcast where I'm gonna break down every single battle, because honestly, that's not the important thing about the consequences of it. So, for the first year and a half, things kind of went well for the Indians. Because the Indians, they've been preparing for this for decades, and they knew their strengths. They used hit-and-run tactics, while what did the English do, right? They used militiamen who marched in these big boxes down roads, and what are the Indians are good at, right? Guerrilla tactics. What we would today call guerrilla tactics, right? Hit and run, ambush, skirmishes. It's okay, fighting the bigger opponent 101. If they're big, they're slow, and therefore you're fast, so you just try to do death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Yeah.
And so for like the first year or two, it goes okay in the Indians' favor. They, they've got supplies, they've got stockpiles, and of course they don't have huge cities like the English, so they can, they can lose ground because they technically don't have to like defend for, you know,
Yeah.
defend points of interests, right? But part of that concept though is that if you're gonna like pull guerrilla tactics and retreat, you need a safe place to retreat to, right? To use a more contemporary example, this is in the Vietnam War. The guerrilla fighters could always retreat to North Vietnam when they had to, right? That was their safe. That was their safe zone, right? A problem with in King Philip's War, they didn't have a safe zone, and this is why the Mohawks fucked them. Because when they started retreating east, they're like, oh, we got women, children, elderly, supplies, wounded, or we just need to like
retreating west.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, they were retreating west. Yeah, and they were like, okay, we need to like move our women and children, or supplies, or just our wounded, or just like catch our breath, right? Yeah. But going west brought them to Mohawk territory, and the Mohawks were of the opinion of
in weapons.
Maybe not even an ally of the English. Is like, we don't want to fuck the English. We don't want the English mad at us because we want something from them, right?
Yeah.
And so they, when of King Philip's alliance started going west and tried to like move toward, that brought them to Mohawk territory, and the Mohawks attacked them. Yeah. And so this war only ends up lasting like that kind of doomed them. Because if you don't, they didn't have a place to retreat to, right? That was one of the biggest reasons that they lost this war. The other reason was that eventually the English learned that they could that it was beneficial for them to use native allies instead of treating every native like an enemy. Yeah. This is one of the reasons.
My understanding of history is, like you said, this becomes a rinse and repeat. All the Europeans just realize we don't have to fight all of them. Some of these guys hate each other. Let's just give one side weapons, help them, let them take most of the freaking casualties, and then we're in a better position with whatever group we helped, and we can just take them out at our leisure if we ever want to.
Yeah. And King Philip's War becomes the pattern for how the U.S. conquers the continent, is because the English colonists, the first 2 years, they don't think to use Native American auxiliaries, even though there are prayer Indians, they're like, oh, all Indians are our enemy. But after the first 2 years, they're like, okay, we can use Indian auxiliaries, not all of them. Some of them are willing to fight for us against King Philip and his allies. And so, not only does King Philip's alliance not have a safe space to retreat to lick their wounds, they're even more outnumbered than they would be if they were only fighting the English.
Yeah.
And so they're doomed, by 1676. And so by this point, the war's lasted about 4 years. So it's over. And in 1676, August 12th, King Philip, you know, Pumtacom, aka King Philip, would be killed by a Christian Indian named Halderman. Sporadic fighting continues for a few more months, but at this point, it's over,
Yeah.
At that point, it's just people who'd rather die fighting than surrender. Estimates for Indian casualties are about 3,000 who died in the actual fighting. Over 2,000 would be tried, sentenced, and sold into slavery. Remember how in an earlier episode we talked about how Tismuchin was like captured and sold into slavery and ended up with the Caribbean for a bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Indians were. I'm sorry. What?
No, all I said was yeah.
Yeah, and so a lot of these, if they didn't die in battle, they were captured, sold into slavery. And in fact, that happens to Philip's son, I believe. He is sold into slavery.
Yeah, and I imagine it was a lot. I imagine a lot of that number was women and children.
Yeah. And in a example of good old medieval brutality, they didn't just kill Philip. They dismembered him. And his head, his head was displayed outside the walls of Plymouth for 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, just his head. I don't know how they displayed the head. I like to think it was, just on a stick for 20 years. At that point, it's just, it's a skull, But, yeah.
Yeah, at a certain point, yeah, it definitely was just a skull for most of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in the long run, it's hard to judge in the long run, the Indians who at least sided with the English, they did manage to avoid immediate destruction. They maintained their lands and some level of sovereignty. But this was the sign where it's no longer the English are dealing with a semi-equal power. It's the English are in control, and you're gonna do what they say, right? Yeah, the local sachems would continue to sell land to the English, and the Indians would lose more and more land. But this eventually creates a situation where the Indians stop choosing sachems. And just and instead of having a guy in charge, they start doing a thing of, it's all communal land. We can't sell anything unless the council or community agrees to it, right? And due to violence, such as the war, such as a lot of men going off to do whaling or go and fighting and stuff like that, there is a huge male-female imbalance, and so there's a lot of outside marriage, right?
Yeah.
Which leads to a situation where a lot of these communities decide that, the women get to decide what happens to land because they don't want some outside husband coming in, marrying an Indian woman, and then selling off more Indian land.
Yeah.
But the writing's on the wall, and they don't want to resort to reservations, but eventually they all resort to going on reservations. And this is this is not a slow process. This is a matter of decades and generations of them trying to resist this encroachment on their land, on their authority.
Yeah.
But they, yeah,
It's an eventuality.
yeah. And granted, this
Well, we can
this takes
we can say
a
that in
while.
hindsight, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but due to this is what I find kind of and what I mean an eventuality. Yeah, yeah. That these reservations are dissolved a little before the Civil War. The American Civil War. So we're talking like the 1850s, 1860s. So King Philip's War, 1670s. They resist encroachment. They eventually resort to reservations because it's a way to maintain the U.S. federal government says we get this.
Yeah, and it was a way for them to maintain some autonomy. Is that
Yeah.
what you were going for?
Yeah, because that's the big thing for them is they're like, we are not American. We are our own thing. We
are
want
not you.
control of our own land, our own autonomy, right?
Yeah.
But by the time of the late 1840s, early 1860s, there there is a push by state legislators, the federal government. They're like, oh, they're not really Indians anymore, because, and a bit of this is what I find kind of funny, sad, funny, ironic, where, so, are you aware of one-drop laws?
No, not that term.
Okay, so, when it came to you know how there was, like, for African Americans, they were like, oh, black people can't go in these train cars, they can't use these drinking fountains, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the thing with that is you have to decide, okay, who counts as being black African American?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was, yeah, and those laws, most of them had a one drop concept. You could trace any of one of your ancestors being it was like if you were 1/16th, you were still
Yeah.
considered by the law African American.
That started in Kentucky, if I remember right. Well, I have actually heard
this
a lot
stuff
of
predates America.
Yeah, look, it goes long way back, but so Kentucky actually had a very odd thing. I forget what year, where they were doing all this backwards research to see who was what, and what they call anybody with some black genealogy in their blood was a macchiato or something, or mulatto. Something
Mulatto
along the lines.
is the term you're looking for.
Yeah. So yeah, it was originally anybody who was 1/8. Then it became 1/16th. And yeah, the one drop rule was for any Native American blood, except they had a weird exception in Kentucky. The only reason I bring this up, and I thought it was interesting, was if anybody, sorry, was this Kentucky? I'm pretty sure it was. If anybody had any ancestry related to Pocahontas, it was okay. Because
Pocahontas
maybe I'm thinking of the
died
wrong
in
story.
London, though, and I don't even know if she had kids.
Yeah, but it didn't matter. A lot of the white people there would say, no, but it's okay because it was Pocahontas, and she's so ingrained into our history as this iconic figure that's okay.
That's so.
Man,
stupid.
people. People, man.
That is so stupid. I believe it.
Yeah,
That is-
I mean, I haven't written down the specifics, but
Yeah, no,
That's
that is so
vaguely,
stupid. I believe it though.
yeah, vaguely what happened and what I remember from where it happened. Yeah, yeah. It's like, no, it's not okay at all. Except for this one way that it is, because our family's been claiming that, we're a part of the original ancestry of, the original colonists, and Pocahontas was involved, and blah, blah, blah. So that's okay.
So
Uh,
stupid.
Legislatures, man. I'm making a law. It applies to everyone. Except
Except
me.
me. Yeah. Yeah, that's. I believe it. But, so to get. Why I brought that up is because
Yeah, I hadn't
in
heard the
a
term
bit
one
of
drop yet.
reverse, in a bit of reverseism, instead of them applying the concept of like one drop to these now on reservation Native American tribes, right? It's, oh, you're not pure Indians, and therefore you're not real Indians, so therefore you don't actually exist, so you don't need reservations anymore.
Yeah. Uh, man, that's such a slap in the face. So exactly what you
Right?
were talking about before has happened all throughout. Look, the invention of lawyers. That's really what it comes down to. Because this is again where you're taking the letter of the law versus the spirit of a law or agreement and just bastardizing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, uh, and granted, because there was such a male-female disparity, a lot of women, of the women of these tribes, they
Hmm.
had to marry outside men just if they wanted to get married at all, right?
Yeah.
And so, well, like a lot of African Americans married into these tribes because, if you're both being fucked over by the white man, it makes, it's like, oh, wait, you're also being fucked over by the white man? I'm being fucked over by the white man, too. And so Native Americans and African Americans, got along, and there was a lot of intermarriage between them, right?
Yeah, I'd heard that. I mean, yeah, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, my understanding, a lot of people who escaped slavery, I mean, that was a place to go way back
Yeah,
far
it
when.
was. Yeah, a lot of them joined Native American tribes, at least northern ones. But that's another
Yeah,
trend
yeah.
I am not prepared to go on because I haven't done enough research on that yet.
But yeah, of course, you're both getting screwed over by somebody like you said. Why
Yeah.
not? Yeah, get along.
Be friendly to each other. But this created the excuse for legislators in the Northeast to dissolve the reservations. And so, some of these reservations became their own towns. Some of them got incorporated into larger towns. But the short of it is that they were no longer reservations. They were just towns now inside the states that they were inside. You know? They still managed to retain a lot of some autonomy though, because if you're a town, you elect your own mayors and city councils and stuff like that. In fact, a lot of them would, even when some of these places became like summer homes for rich people, right? They would purposely hold elections in winter months so that none of the summer or transient people would be there.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
at least they were smart.
Yeah, and so it's a little impressive how all the the sneaky ways they manage to retain their
How they
local
learned from
autonomy.
Europeans.
Right? you know, well, well, well. And
Yeah, they learned how to play their game.
yeah, and to end this on a bit of a higher note, right? So that this is not completely depressing.
Just well, so just a question: when did reservations get reinstated? Because obviously they did.
Ah. Well, and again, it varies from tribe to tribe, right? These reservations being dissolved are specifically for these northeastern Indians, right?
Okay.
But a lot of them were reinstated relatively
Yeah.
recently. A lot of that has to do with what's called the Red Power. Like, you've heard the Civil Rights Movement, right?
Yeah. Of course.
1960s, 1970s, the hippie
Yeah.
era, right? Our
Yeah.
parents, right? Well, part of the Civil Rights Movement, there was the Red Power Movement, which was Native
Heard
Americans.
a little bit about this. They had
Yeah.
dissolved tribes or something, and then I had heard a story about them occupying Alcatraz of all the strange things.
Yeah, because
They were
yeah,
public
and they
property
occupied
that was
Alcatraz
surplus.
just to make a stake, just to make a point,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But during this time period, the you know was when a lot of these north was when the Wampanoag, for instance, got some of their reservations reinstated because they sued.
They had a bunch of Native Americans who were studying as lawyers,
Yeah,
getting their law
fight
degrees.
fire with fire. You need a lawyer to kill a lawyer,
That's a good
Right.
expression. I like that.
right? And so, basically, the argument that the gist of the argument was that so these reservations were dissolved by the states, but the
Oh, okay.
states technically don't have that authority. The Constitution, the U.S. Constitution is very short, right? I'm surprised everyone should read it because it's very short, and the fact that we don't read it is
The fact that, yeah, there's no civic studies in school anymore, or just,
is a
social
way to
studies. Social studies, at least, you should read your own country's
Yeah.
constitution.
Yeah, so that you can know what it does and does not say. And one of the things the U.S. Constitution does say is, one of the points of the roles of the federal government is Indian affairs. States do not have that power. And so for the states to dissolve the reservations was deemed unconstitutional, so the reservations were instated due to the Red Power movement.
That's insane. How many years after it had been done?
About 100.
years? Yeah.
Yeah.
100 years. Wow.
But the fact that they managed to retain their community that long, like a sense of community that long, is,
Yeah, because I'm
It's
sure
impressive.
the plan was, I'm sure the lawyers who did this statewide knew, yeah, we can actually do this, but they don't know that. And by the time they figure it out,
well,
they'll be gone.
it's also, it's
I just
more a matter
imagine.
of nobody cared. And that
Yeah.
is one lesson, is that, we talk about, like, law, like, this is the law. It's like, the law is whatever the people enforcing the law want it to be, really,
Yeah.
But,
You're
yeah.
you're not allowed to drive barefoot in Florida. I could try to look up
I've
the last
heard-
person arrested for it. It's probably a very long time ago.
I
Yeah.
remember being told that when I was learning to drive, where you're not allowed to drive barefoot. I wasn't sure. And keep in mind, I got my driver's license in Washington State. I wasn't sure
Yeah.
if that was an actual law or just something my mom told me.
Certain states, it's really fun to look up, especially state laws that have never been expunged. Just nobody enforces them anymore, so nobody cares. But specifically, since I grew up in Florida, I looked up a whole bunch of extenuating, ridiculous Florida laws that nobody follows or cares about anymore, but nobody has taken the time or cares to delete, to, actually
Yeah,
get rid
because
of.
to delete the law, there's a process, and that
Yeah.
process takes time and energy.
And
And you could you
so many
could
people
use that time and energy to pass a law people care about.
Yeah, but exactly what you just said, where it's like, it only matters if people care.
Yeah.
Because off the top of my head, things I remember, there's like certain times of the day you can cut your grass in Florida. It's like you can't cut your grass on a Sunday with your shirt off or something weird like that. I forget the exact specifics, but it was something along that line. You can't sell baby ducks in front of a storefront in Florida.
You see that law? And it was like, to me at least, I can imagine somebody passing that law, because I can imagine a few hundred years ago, it's like, okay,
Somebody did something.
somebody had a business, and there was some hobo selling ducks in front of their store, and so they didn't want that to happen, so they sent a letter to a friend saying, pass a law so this hobo can't sell ducks in front of my store. So at least I can understand why that law got passed.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
it's
all
still
these-
stupid, but people are petty. So I can believe somebody was petty enough to pass that law. It makes perfect again, I'm crazy, but because I'm crazy, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't get I don't get the whole mowing your lawn without a shirt law though. That's just
I'm sure it had something to do with it specifically.
with my crazy mind, who can understand pettiness, that still doesn't make sense to me.
Specifically
Why
has to
bother?
do with it being on a Sunday and a certain
Oh wait,
time
no,
of
it's
day.
only on Sunday. Wait, so
It's
so
only
I
on
can,
Sunday,
I
and it's
can
only at a
mow
certain
my
time
lawn
of day.
shirtless on Monday then.
So I can tell you, it probably has something to do with people getting home from church and seeing
Because of
somebody
course
cutting their
Christians have to
lawn.
ruin everything, don't they?
Somebody cutting their lawn without their shirt on. Probably, a family with kids in the car. I'm just assuming here. But the fact that it has to do with Sunday gives me.
I'm imagining
that
little
it's
Timmy
something
was
for-
terrified because they were driving home, and so just some fat bastard with like man boobs was mowing their lawn, and like, don't look, little Timmy.
Maybe it was the wife. Who knows?
Okay, please. If that was the wife, you'd be like, if you're mowing the lawn on Sundays, you're not allowed to wear a shirt. If that was the case,
No.
go full European beach.
If I'm naked inside of my house and I have all my windows open, can I be arrested for indecent exposure? Sorry, look, hey, we're way off topic. We'll talk about this after.
Yeah. Again, I am trying to end this on a high note because life
love
and
that.
history is depressing enough. I have one more high note to talk about, though. Right? So, well, the Wamapong language was, when there were native speakers, they created a written version of it, and some of the first books published in North America were in Wamapong, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, due to a lot of bullshit, such as people passing laws saying you're not allowed to teach classes and you have to teach classes in English and bullshit like that, right?
I've heard of that.
Eventually, all the native speakers died out.
Yeah, I heard it. Certain, especially Christian schools and stuff, like, they weren't allowed to speak in their language to make sure they learned English.
It was
In front of, yeah.
like these reservation schools are basically taught by missionaries who are supposed to,
Bleed out.
un-Indian the Indian.
Yeah, bleed out their culture.
Yeah, and both North America and Canada are guilty of this. We like to pretend Canada is like the non-ugly version of America, but you can basically, like, almost everything people point at America and says, look at the horrible thing America has done. Almost everything that that people point the U.S. of doing, Canada has also done.
Yeah, they just did it. They just did it speaking French, which makes them worse.
Touche. Right? And I say almost because, Canadian history is not something I've gone super in depth. I own most of the Canadian history I know is when they've gone to war with the U.S. and technically, Canada has beaten the U.S.
Right on.
But off topic, to
Yeah.
get back to the high note I'm trying to end on, and so
La 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 la. That was a high note.
So, yeah. So, in the 1990s, so this is relatively recent because I remember being a kid in the 90s, right?
I would hope so, unless you have a concussion.
Nope, no concussion yet. Okay.
All right.
But in the 1990s, a woman by the name of. My notes are fucked up. Anyway, so you have a.
Oh, I thought it was just really hard to pronounce.
No, it's. My notes say in the early 1990s, Mashpee's Jessie Little Doe Braid had a series of dreams in which Wampanoag ancestors spoke to her in a language she could not understand. Her interpretation of this vision, with the assistance of elders, led her on a historic mission. Jessie reconstructed the Wampanoag language from old books written in the Wampanoag language and recreated her ancestral language. She then started teaching classes in the language. And now there are people who speak Wampanoag now because in the 1990s Jessie had a dream.
That's amazing.
Right? And that is, that's a heartwarming high note that I am choosing to end this on. Because granted, that's the 1990s and is now 2022. So I'm going to choose to end it there because, I don't... It's a good note. I think it's a good note. It's a good place to end this,
Well, you covered a couple hundred years. I think we're good on the last 30.
And granted, I did yada yada through 200 of those, through most of that. But the high note is that the Wampanoag managed to they lost their reservations, they lost their language, but they've managed to get some of their reservations back and to rediscover their language. Throughout all that adversity.
Yeah.
They're still alive. They're still around. And it's impressive. History's depressing enough. This is at least a little encouraging.
Yeah. Well, do yourself a favor and end it on that note before I make a messed up joke and put us on a downward spiral.
Right? So, anyway, I'm Forrest.
I'm Justin.
And if we had pluggables, we would do pluggables, but at this point, bye!